Okay, let's jump right in. Welcome to today's explainer, where we're going to objectively map out a really provocative argument from a channel called the Alpha Path. We're looking at their fascinating thesis regarding what they call the intentional destruction of modern beauty. Now, if you've ever looked around your city and thought, things seem a bit more sterile or maybe just less aesthetically pleasing these days, you are absolutely going to want to pay close attention to what we have lined up for you. To immediately set up the central problem this creator points out, I want you to think about this number, $1,850. Now, what's crazy is what that massive price tag actually gets you. It belongs to a pair of Balenciaga sneakers designed specifically to look like they were literally just pulled directly from a dumpster. Seriously. They also sell a purse for roughly the same price that looks identical to a shiny plastic trash bag. The Alpha Path uses this as a prime example to argue that our culture is currently actively elevating the destroyed and the degraded over the beautiful. And this phenomenon isn't just in high fashion. It bleeds right into the world of fine art. $2.5 million. That astronomical price tag was attached to an art installation by Tracy Emin, which, was essentially just her dirty, unmade bed. We're talking stained sheets, empty bottles, cigarette butts scattered all over the floor, the whole shebang. The source contrasts this massive valuation with the undeniable perceived ugliness of the object itself, which effectively sets the stage for their core argument about modern aesthetics. Which perfectly tees up Section 1, the modern cult of ugliness. According to the Alpha Path, this degradation isn't just some happy accident, and it's not a passive shift in consumer taste. They posit that modern architects, artists, and designers are actively and even openly bragging about tearing down beauty on purpose. They aren't just missing the mark of beauty, they're aiming at a completely different target altogether. The source makes a really crucial historical distinction here. They acknowledge that, sure, past movements, think Gothic architecture or the Impressionist painters, were heavily mocked when they first debuted. But, and here is the key takeaway, those past eras were still actively striving to create something beautiful. In stark contrast, the creator argues that somewhere in the 20th century, modern creators decided that beauty itself was the actual enemy. To back this up, the source references a documentary by the philosopher Roger Scruton, who observed that modern culture has embraced a literal cult of ugliness. Scruton basically argued that beauty offers humanity deep consolation, affirmation, and joy in a really difficult world. But modern art, music, and architecture, they've seemingly abandoned that mission entirely. We can actually see the real-world impact of that shift in thinking right in our own cities. On one hand, we have modern high-rise offices, structures often designed, by the architect's own admission, purely for functionality and cheapness. They just take the form of stark, towering concrete blocks. On the other hand, we have historical buildings. The source points out a very practical, grounded reality. Nobody is booking a flight halfway across the world to Paris just to go look at a highly functional concrete office building. No way. They travel to see the old, beautiful structures that were designed with aesthetics top of mind. The Alpha Path argues you can clearly see this exact same dynamic in music too. Just contrast avant-garde composer John Cage's critically acclaimed piece 433, which is literally 4 minutes and 33 seconds of total silence, with music that authentically moves the human heart. The creator notes that while critics might heap praise on the total silence of Cage or the chaotic lack of melody in other modern composers, nobody is driving to work listening to that by choice. Music either genuinely moves you or it doesn't. Moving right along to Section 2, the case for transcendent beauty. So, if modern culture is rejecting beauty, where do universal standards of beauty actually come from in the first place? Are they just social constructs that change with the wind? Or is there something way deeper at play? Well, the source presents a unique argument to prove that beauty is a transcendent standard, rather than just a newly invented societal rule. They argue that when biological men who identify as women seek to present themselves, they inevitably reach for universally recognized feminine traits, things like shaving their legs, growing out long hair, putting on makeup, wearing dresses. The Alpha Path uses this to neutrally argue that these individuals aren't inventing a new standard out of thin air, but rather they're striving to achieve a pre-existing, universal standard of feminine beauty that transcends mere cultural taste. So if the standard truly is universal, where does it originate? That brings us to this incredibly fascinating concept, gratuitous beauty. Philosophers define this as beauty in the natural world that is vastly more intricate, stunning, and elaborate than mere biological survival ever requires. Think about it. When a grown man is moved to tears by a brilliant sunset, it's not because the sunset keeps him alive or helps him forage for food, right? It's the sheer, breathtaking beauty of it that just breaks something open inside him. The source provides some frankly amazing examples to really hammer this point home. Think about distant galaxies that absolutely no human eye ever saw until we built massive modern telescopes. Or think about the vibrant, glowing colors inside a deep coral reef 1,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. Or the incredibly elaborate melodies of bird songs that go way beyond what simply attracting a mate requires. The source argues that because these stunning wonders existed long before humans could even witness them, they prove that the universe was created with intentional artistic design. Which leads into Section 3, Rebellion Against Divine Design. This brings us to the AlphaPath's specific diagnosis for exactly why our modern culture seems to actively embrace the ugly instead of the beautiful. The creator anchors their diagnosis for this cultural shift firmly in Scripture. They reference Genesis, noting God specifically made trees pleasant to the sight before making them good for food. They point to Psalm 19, Ecclesiastes, and critically, Exodus 31. In Exodus, the source highlights a really fascinating detail. The very first man in Scripture described as being filled with the Spirit of God was a man named Bezalel, and he was filled specifically for the purpose of craftsmanship and art. Furthermore, the source points out that Scripture actively celebrates beauty in humanity itself. Biblical figures like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Esther were all explicitly commended for their physical beauty. For the creator, this serves as hard evidence that the Bible doesn't shy away from beauty. Rather, it celebrates it as a direct reflection of God's own creative vision for humanity. And this brings us to the absolute core thesis of the creator's argument. The AlphaPath argues that when mankind makes beautiful art, stunning music, or breathtaking architecture, we are reflecting the God who made us. Therefore, they argue, today's intentional ugliness isn't just a matter of bad taste. It is a direct, spiritual rebellion that purposefully takes what God made beautiful and degrades it into the grotesque. To vividly illustrate this historical and spiritual root of rebellion, the creator recounts a dramatic story from 1 Kings chapter 18. It's the story of the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. When faced with total silence from their false god, they escalated their rituals by screaming and intentionally disfiguring and cutting their own bodies with swords. The source uses this really intense imagery to argue that exchanging the beautiful for the profane and destroying what is whole has always been a historical marker of spiritual rebellion against the divine. Finally, Section 4, Restoration through the Gospel. So, if their diagnosis is a spiritual rebellion, what's the cure? Here, we are going to objectively outline the specific solution and the call to action that the AlphaPath proposes for men living in today's world. The source introduces a deep theological concept from the early church father Irenaeus, recapitulation. Now, according to this framework, sin corrupted a beautiful world, bringing in decay and chaos. But Christ stepping into that chaos begins a universal process of recapitulation, which is essentially Christ restoring and reclaiming absolutely everything that Adam originally lost. It's a mechanism of total, cosmic, and personal restoration. And that concept ties directly into a famous quote, also from Irenaeus. The glory of God is man fully alive. The AlphaPath passionately believes that a man who is fully alive is one who actively pursues beauty and reflects the God who made him. It's about carrying that internal image of God and proudly expressing it outwardly through creation, craftsmanship, and just how he lives his day-to-day life. So how does a man actually achieve this restoration? The source provides a sequential, actionable roadmap. Step 1 is transforming hearts through the gospel, because they argue the ugliness in the world stems directly from ugliness in the human heart. Step 2 is applying that transformation to the home, leading a happy family that is submitted to Christ. And finally, step 3 is allowing that internal transformation to naturally radiate outward into the wider world. They emphatically argue that the answer isn't just trying to paint prettier pictures. True restoration only happens by achieving genuine internal transformation first. Which leaves us with a deeply provocative question to end our explainer today. If our external world truly reflects our internal state, does the art and architecture of our generation simply show changing cultural tastes, or does it boldly reveal the spiritual condition of our hearts? It's a profound thought derived directly from the AlphaPath's argument. Thank you so much for joining me as we unpacked these concepts and explored this fascinating perspective today. I highly encourage you to ponder this relationship between art, beauty, and the human spirit as you go about your day and just look at the world around you. Catch you next time.